Defeating King K. Rool, A New Life. Donkey Kong Country. Published on my website, accordionsprout.com, 7th of October, 2025. My niece was born an hour after I finished Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, SNES, on my Nintendo Switch. 3 months later, she would be sitting in my lap, grabbing the joystick on my Xbox One controller while I played Super Mario Sunshine on my PC, her eyes fixed on the bright colors on the screen, and my fingers moving across the surface of my controller. My mother, sister, and girlfriend were all present and took several photographs of the event, and I can only hope when she grows up to be a multi-million-dollar streamer, or whatever will be the future equivalent of streamers 20 years from now, she'll remember this video game session, or at least post one of these photos with the caption #family, #look at Uncle Jammer's hair, #cringe. I'm assuming, of course, that hashtags will be relevant in the future the way I'm assuming they're still relevant today. I was sitting in a corner of an excruciatingly white waiting room because it had an outlet and also provided enough space away from a group of people, my father and brother-in-law's family to be specific, who were busy discussing politics, a topic I avoid the way I avoid cottonmouths and cow killers. For clarification, for those of you who weren't raised in the southwestern United States, those are the colloquial names for Agistrodon piscivorus, the water moccasin snake, and Dasyamutilla occidentalis, also known as velvet ants, which, fun fact, are not actually ants, they're wingless wasps that walk around on the ground. I stay out of political conversations on general principle, and it should be noted by then it was the second night in a row that my sister was in labor and had spent well over 6 hours in the waiting room by that point with the same group of people in the hospital. Hospitals, like discussing politics, leave me annoyed and frustrated and nauseated. The fact that this was a Catholic and therefore religious institution and contained numerous biblical paintings and even a 5-foot-tall statue of Jesus behind glass was pushing me to my philosophical and psychological limits. I'm an atheist, for further clarification. There's a lot of clarification so far in this essay, more than I intended. Perhaps a better writer would have found a way to avoid that. Well, management will work on trying to find a better writer. In the meantime, I'll keep going. These collected external factors were all exacerbated by my brain, which is, putting it colloquially, busted. I have difficulty processing reality even when I'm not emotionally and intellectually exhausted, and the liminal space of the endless white halls was cresting me to the point of some kind of breakdown. Seriously, that hospital was becoming the back rooms or the Overlook Hotel, and any moment I was about to turn the corner and there would have been a man in a dog suit screaming at me. Also, the Jesus statue vaguely resembled a weeping angel from Doctor Who and was making me afraid to blink. Hyperbole aside, my brain was steadily losing its ability to keep my feet grounded, so I reached into my backpack, grabbed my Nintendo Switch and my headphones, and started to play Donkey Kong Country. I had, up to that moment, been actively avoiding the game because I only had one level left. Specifically, it was Gangplank Galleon, which is the final level in the first Donkey Kong Country game and, narratively speaking, is the conclusion where Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong face off against their rival, the plump, bulbous wad that is King K. Rool. The setup for Donkey Kong Country is that King K. Rool has stolen all of Donkey Kong's precious bananas in the cavern below his house where he keeps them. The implications of the health nightmare of that storage space aside, Donkey begins his quest to find his bananas and defeat King K. Rool and his minions who have invaded, and I promise I ain't making this up, Congo Bongo Island. To any Fallout fans reading this, you know exactly what song I almost started singing as I wrote that last sentence. Donkey Kong Country is a side-scrolling platformer video game, much like Super Mario World, a contemporary game for the SNES. Donkey Kong Country was structured and marketed as a sequel to the original Donkey Kong games, which had been released originally in arcades and were designed by Shigeru Miyamoto. The story of how the game became the economic and cultural milestones that they would eventually become is for another essay. What's important for this essay is that Donkey Kong Country became a game about the next generation. Donkey Kong in the game is actually Donkey Kong Jr., and the original Donkey Kong is now Cranky Kong. The opening cutscene, which precedes the actual game, apart from being, according to the teenagers these days, iconic, is also a rhetorical structure to demonstrate the changing of the guard. The scene begins with Cranky Kong turning a record player in a dark room with red scaffolding in the foreground. The music is soft and steady, and Cranky taps his ancient foot to it before, out of nowhere, a large black boombox, that was what we called them big radios, what turned on them D batteries, you youngsters, drops from the ceiling, plays in the 90s equivalent of the previous song, while Donkey Kong jumps from the ceiling, knocking Cranky off the platform. The world shifts to a jungle, and Donkey Kong offers up some slick dance moves before Cranky throws a barrel of TNT at him. This opening was, to quote the teenagers of yesteryear, aka the 90s, totally rad, dude. Donkey Kong was now for the next generation of kids who got it. And it was... Well, I can't actually remember what it actually was, but Donkey Kong Country definitely had it, and it was rad. I've noted in a few essays for this website that when it came to my earliest experience with video games, it was primarily playing on my parents' SNES, and my favorite game of all time was Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The hierarchy of my favorite games after that was my copy of Super Mario All-Stars, followed by Donkey Kong Country. Those three games encapsulate what video games were to my young mind, and I remember them the most because I played them more than any other game. I remember playing it with my friends, who, for the record, were way, way better at playing it than I ever was. I remember playing with my dad, who was also way better at it than I was. And I remember playing it with my babysitter, Rachel. Spoiler alert, she kicked that game's butt. The social connections aside, I loved Donkey Kong Country for its soundtrack. I loved the surreal quality of its anthropomorphic creatures. I loved the pre-rendered backgrounds. I had complicated feelings about Candy Kong. And most importantly, I loved Funky Kong because his theme was rad. In fact, here's a link to Funky's theme music because you deserve it. And to those of you who are listening to this essay right now, I will post a link to a video on YouTube that's Funky's theme music. Seriously, go listen to it. Like, for real. Seriously, if you get a chance. I know I'm doing a sin by telling you to go leave this video to go to another video, but like, seriously, if you've never listened to Funky's theme before, listen to it. It owns. Seriously. Moving on. Nostalgia plays a crucial role in explaining why I think about this game as much as I do, but there's still enough critical lens and intellectual obsession to understand why this game mattered so much to me. It was a solid platformer with surreal visuals and music that created a powerful aesthetic impression. It didn't matter to me that I never beat the final level of Gangplank Galleon, because I could always watch my friends beat King K. Rool. Then again, I didn't have many friends, but that's immaterial. It was, and it is, an admission of incompetence to say I wasn't good enough to defeat King K. Rool on the SNES. And in fact, even 35 years later, I only beat the game because the Switch offers a rewind function that lets me go back and, quote, correct a poorly timed jump or roll. I recognize a purist mindset immediately springing into my brain, and a kind of imposter syndrome screams, "That's not really beating the game because that's cheating." My response to this is, dude, I'm 35. I'm literally older than this game. I don't care. Also, at the time of the recording, I'm 36. I'm still older than this game, and I still don't care, alright? The rewind function is awesome, so deal with it. This thought, apart from being therapeutic in its catharsis, is also the reason why I decided to sit down and finally beat the game while my niece was taking her sweet time being born. Gangplank Galleon as a level is structured like most of the boss fights in Donkey Kong Country. The player has a flat surface, platform. However, the space is wide enough that they will have to move Donkey Kong to the right until King K. Rool is revealed. Once the bulbous glutton that is King K. Rool spots you, or more accurately, once the character's AI recognizes the Donkey Kong sprite in its vicinity, the character will begin his attack and throw his crown directly at Donkey Kong. This is the first test of the final battle, and as the level continues, these throws will quicken, testing the player's ability to anticipate their trajectory and jump in time to avoid it, as well as time a jump on King K. Rool's now vulnerable head. The crown is the first test, and the one I was able to beat. The second test is what always stopped me. Once King K. Rool is attacked, the crown will appear on his head, and he will charge Donkey, and Diddy Kong, to the opposite side of the stage out of sight. Sometimes these bull rush charges will happen multiple times before his next attack, and the player will have to jump to avoid him. The challenge, of course, is that because Gangplank Galleon has spaces out of sight, sometimes it's difficult to know when they will be attacked. Likewise, once King K. Rool stops moving and is usually out of sight, he'll throw his crown again. But running and throwing are not the only challenges, because in later portions of this fight, King K. Rool will begin leaping across the boat's top deck. The trajectory of each jump has to be quickly calculated by the player, and to make matters worse, no two jumps are the same distance. The AI will generate different lengths of each jump, meaning that there's not a regular pattern to anticipate. Likewise, as King K. Rool jumps out of sight, the player will have to follow and hope that they do not accidentally land right in the pathway of the fleshy boulder. Where's Chris Redfield when you need him? Finally, there's one more challenge to this boss fight, and that's King K. Rool's balls. Cannonballs, just so we're clear. Once King K. Rool has stopped moving, hopping, or throwing his crown, he will jump up and down, triggering cannonballs to fall from the ceiling? To be honest, it isn't entirely clear. The point is, King K. Rool is a pirate. The player is on a pirate ship. It's just best not to overthink it. The point is, once again, the game is challenging the player to move Donkey Kong within the space to avoid physical obstacles. And this cannonball barrage is as much a QuickTime event, QTE, as much as it is a general platformer challenge. I admit freely, and with full honesty, I was regularly and consistently crushed under King K. Rool's balls. His cannonballs. Just to be clear. All of these obstacles are a challenge, not just because they're legitimately difficult, but because they show the player how far they have progressed since the beginning of the game. At this point, the player has had to learn how best to dodge and navigate around every obstacle that Donkey Kong Country has to offer. Whether it's rolling right through a naughty beaver, making sure to hop onto a claptrap rather than rolling through it, or just plain avoiding zingers, the player has been taught through sheer repetition how to encounter enemy NPCs and obstacles to determine what is the best strategy. These physical puzzles have established enough pattern recognition that, by the time the player sets foot on the deck of Gangplank Galleon, they'll have enough knowledge and skill to settle into the rhythm of the final boss. Thinking about this game afforded me a chance to reflect on platformers. Platforming video games have fallen in popularity as the medium began to develop into three-dimensional representation, and genres such as the role-playing game, RPG, and first-person shooter, FPS, surged in popular appeal and began to dominate the market. Let me be clear, this is not a declaration that the platformer is dead as a genre. That kind of statement is made by, honestly, idiots who are usually trying to generate clicks, views, or just a bit of quick cultural capital. The success of games like Spelunky, Cuphead, and Shovel Knight are proof alone that such statements are not only misguided, they're just not true. Platforming video games are still being made, and a number of them are just as brilliant as the early efforts of the video game industry. Donkey Kong Country is a great platformer. Probably one of the greatest platformer games ever made. And it's a game I spent a lot of time with as a child. When contemplating how to approach this essay, I realized this would be less an intellectual effort on my part and something far more reflective. Completing a video game I had been playing as long as I could remember anything that was also about the next generation of platformers seemed appropriate as I was about to be introduced to a new life. Or at least the closest I would ever get to a new life. I had a vasectomy in June of 2022 because, I have to be honest, I don't like children. I didn't enjoy being a child because there was so much I didn't understand, other children weren't particularly nice, and adults always seemed to find something wrong with me, even though they were usually professing how, quote, lovely I was to my parents. As I've reached adulthood, I recognize how much I still don't like children very much. And my fondness for babies is, mathematically speaking, below absolute zero. I didn't want to be a father, and so I took steps to make sure I never will be one. The reality that I am, scientifically speaking, a biological dead end is its own emotional and psychological exploration. I can say with full conviction that I'm glad I won't have a child of my own, but I'm glad my sister was finally able to. I defeated King K. Rool on the evening of January 30th around 11:45 p.m. My niece was born January 31st around 12:13 a.m. She came out 9 pounds 7 ounces. In the space of an hour, I became an uncle. At the same time, I became a person who has completed Donkey Kong Country. 3 months later, I neglected to show my niece the game I had been playing the same time she was coming into the world. But if her energy to grab the controller in my hand was proof of anything, it's that infants are highly susceptible to external stimulation, and there will still be a chance for the next generation of players to discover and create experiences with games that are older than they are. Joshua Jammer Smith, 7th of October, 2024. Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, wow, that was a long one, but hey, if you're listening to this, it means you watched the whole video, and whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you. Like, seriously, thank you. I tremendously appreciate it. I know most of these I try to keep under the 15-minute length, but some of these larger essays, it's just, you know, they're long. What can I say? And especially with a game like Donkey Kong Country, I can talk, like, a lot. I know for some people the game hasn't aged terribly well, but for me, I'm still finding things to write about it, talk about it, so endlessly I will gab about Donkey Kong Country. And the fact that you're listening to me is awesome. So, seriously, thank you. You rock. Also, usual boring YouTube claptrap. Please like, share, and subscribe. All that jazz. It really does help me because it lets me know that A, somebody is watching this, B, somebody is enjoying this, and C, there's more of a reason to keep going other than the fact that if I don't do something to be creative, I will lose my dang mind. Likewise, if you enjoy this video series, this channel, if you like my essays, if you like my visual art, please go to the description section below and follow the link to my Patreon. It's just patreon.com/jammerdraws, and it's literally $1 a month. That's it. There's just a $1 tier, and that means I run it the way like a street musician, like I'm always saying. If you like what I'm throwing out, pass me a buck. Or don't. It's your money. It's your time. You do whatever you want. All right, now with all that boring stuff out of the way, is there really much more to say about fighting King K. Rool and Donkey Kong Country? Well, yes, actually, there's quite a bit more to say about it because, like, apart from the fact that this was a highly reflective essay rather than, like, more of an intellectual deconstruction of it, it's still interesting to consider the fact that it took me my entire life up to that point to finally beat King K. Rool. Like, I know there are people who were good at Donkey Kong Country and are good at video games. I am not one of those people. I love playing video games. I am not always good or great or exceptional or even passable at video games. So a lot of times I have to just buckle and watch playthroughs on YouTube. But there was a real satisfaction in beating King K. Rool. There was an emotional satisfaction of, like, finally achieving that. And the fact that it was serendipitous enough to be, like, achieving that at the same time as my niece was being born, I mean, it's a coincidence, you know? It was just something that happened. I don't really buy into the whole idea of it was fate. But it makes for a very interesting essay because as I consider the fact that King K. Rool is, much like a Bowser or a Ganondorf, one of the big bosses of a video game franchise, it's really fascinating, like, the emotional reaction to finally beating the fat tub of guts. And as a boss fight, it's really well structured. Because, again, the way it's broken up into each of these initial phases in terms of just dodging the crown that he throws at you, dodging his bull rush charges, dodging those massive balls that fall down on top of my head and face. Cannonballs, by the way, we're talking about cannonballs and nothing else. Point is, it is a really fun boss fight, and it's a challenging boss fight. 30 years after that game was made, actually more than 30 years, King K. Rool is still a tough boss to beat. Like, sometimes it felt like a Cuphead boss, because over and over and over again, I would lose. And in terms of the final confrontation that I wrote about here, I didn't even mention how many times I had to stop and rewind, how many save states I had to create on my Switch before I finally beat this dude. Part of it is the layout of the level, because you don't get a full perspective of the whole stage. And so on one hand, it's a little... Sometimes I would argue it's a little unfair that you can't see where King K. Rool is coming from, but it just adds to the challenge. And by the time a player has reached King K. Rool, the game has become steadily, or it has progressively become more challenging in terms of timing the platforming correctly. So King K. Rool is a difficult boss to beat, but if a player has really fallen into the rhythm of Donkey Kong Country, if they've really mastered the controls and the mechanics of it, it's not that this is an easy boss fight, but it is still capable to beat it. You just have to be just about anybody but me in order to not beat it. And in terms of the sort of narrative of the game itself, it is admittedly kind of flat, but to be fair, if we consider the structure of the game itself, we don't really have much of a MacGuffin. Donkey Kong had bananas. Donkey Kong's bananas are stolen. Donkey Kong saves bananas from bad guy. I mean, looking for a sort of emotionally nuanced denouement here would be ridiculous. What becomes sort of emotionally climactic is, again, if you're someone like me who's been playing this game virtually as long as I have been alive, there is something tremendously satisfying about finally beating King K. Rool. And it's important to note, to date, King K. Rool is the only boss of the 3 big SNES games that I've beaten. Because like I noted, technically, Super Mario All-Stars has a lot of different Super Mario games, and I have beaten Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 3, but I've never to date beaten Super Mario World. It's on my list of things to get done, and I'm actually almost done with that game too. So, hey, maybe stick around to see my write-up on defeating Bowser. Likewise, to date, I've never beaten Ganon in Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And I still have the rewind function, so I have no good excuse not to go in and beat those characters. You know, it's just life. And also, you know, I've already got 40 or 50 other essays I want to write. But now I feel like I'm beginning to ramble. But the point is that, to my mind, the Battle of King K. Rool is a really emotionally and intellectually satisfying conclusion. It's a wonderful final boss fight because it really encapsulates the growth of a player, starting with the first level of Jungle Hijinks, where all you're doing is learning how to roll and jump and pick up barrels, and then by the time you get to the end of this game, you're having to dodge giant cannonballs, you're having to jump to avoid the flying crown. You have grown so tremendously. I have grown so tremendously as a player, so that even if I die during this boss fight, and I did, there's still an understanding that I'm still learning and that there's still so much opportunity for growth, for life, for just more. I think I'm going to stop there because I'm going to stop right there. So, whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you again for listening. I tremendously appreciate it. And hey, go play some video games.